Distinguished guests and participants, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the G20 virtual side event webinar with the topic of Nuclear Potentials in Energy Transitions, 10th of June 2022. This event hosted by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia in collaborations with the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm Dionisa Syahrazadeh, your host today. I would like to greet all the guests and participants in this event, His and Her Excellency, Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, as Chair of the Energy Transitions Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022. Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo, as Co-Chair of the Energy Transitions Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022. Mr. Dadan Kusdiana as Director General of NREEC, who will be represented by Ms. Andrea Febi Misna as Director for Various New and Renewable Energy MEMR of Republic of Indonesia. Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi as Director General of IAEA. Mr. Hualiu as Deputy Director General and Head of the Department of Technical Cooperation, IAEA. His Excellency Ambassador Hamad Al-Kaabi as Permanent Representative of the UAE to the IAEA and UN organizations. Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya as Director of the Division of Asia and the Pacific, IAEA. Ms. Aline Desclozox as Director of the Division of Nuclear Power, IAEA, who will be represented by Mr. Stefano Monti as Head of Nuclear Power Technology Development Section, IAEA. Mr. Liliana Dulinets as Section Head of Nuclear Infrastructure Development, IAEA. Mr. Manki Lee as Principal Researcher, Korea Atomic Energy Research Institute, and Mr. Peter Fraser as Consultant to IAEA. There are 3 sessions in this webinar. In the first session, we will be listening to the presentation and discussion of achieving net zero and sustainable goals with nuclear energy. The second part entitled Nuclear Energy Options for Emerging Economies, and the third part of the workshop entitled Nuclear Infrastructure Development Enabling Factors and Challenges. Before that, let's listen to the opening remarks that will be delivered by Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi as our Chair of the Energy Transitions Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022. The floor is yours.
All the speakers and participants, greetings to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. I am Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Chair of Energy Transition Working Group ETWG. Is pleased to welcome you all at the 8th webinar of ETWG webinar series on nuclear energy. Before heading there, let me briefly explain Indonesian Presidency's main profile in Energy Transition Forum. G20 Indonesian Presidency addresses the main theme of recover together, recover stronger. The presidency has set 3 pillars, namely global health architecture, digital economic transformation, and sustainable energy transition. The pillar of sustainable energy transition is held under Energy Transition Working Group, addressing 3 priorities on accessibility, technology, and financing. We have done the first meeting of ETWG in Yogyakarta, 24 to 35 March. We will convene again in Labuan Bajo, 23 to 35 June 2022. In the first ETWG meeting, G20 members and invitees unanimously endorsed the 3 priorities in energy transition and the main agenda, heading towards the key deliverable on global deal to accelerate energy transition in the Malaysia meeting and later summit in Bali. We call all these stages as the road to Bali. Realizing the road to Bali, in the ETWG meetings, we will deepen issues of energy transition through the series of virtual webinars. Today's webinar on nuclear potential in energy transition will continue the journey of energy transition discussion throughout the presidency. To the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, I would like to convey our presidency's compliment for taking the strategic role as co-organizer of today's webinar. IAEA and their working networks have been working hard to demonstrate that nuclear energy still has spaces to provide solutions for achieving Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, as well as preparing net zero emission future. So while nuclear power still has potential to achieve SDGs and net zero future. First, emphasizing the urgency to achieve SDGs in the years of post-pandemic global recovery. Nuclear energy has multiple effects to the economy. A new study from International Monetary Fund, IMF, has estimated that investment in nuclear power will create larger economic impacts compared to investment from other energy sources. By forecasting spending multipliers for investment in low-emission energy sources, nuclear energy is estimated for around 6 times larger than fossil energy and around 3 times larger than multiplier for renewable energy over the short term, delivering more rapid economic growth towards a sustainable recovery. Nuclear energy is also estimated to stimulate more investment in other parts of the economy. It can also lead to larger employment of both high and lower speed resources per unit of spending compared to other low emission energy sources. Second, nuclear energy still has an important role as the power baseload, making it become the backbone of low carbon electricity due to its stability. Moreover, nuclear power has potential to produce what's so-called pink hydrogen, the nuclear-based hydrogen production, although hydrogen has no colors. Third, with innovative technologies, nuclear power operation could be extended through lifetime extension, reaching around 1,800 terawatt-hours annually by 2030, or covering around 10% of global clean electricity under the IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario. These are pivotal to make the energy transition back on track after setback due to economic hardship from global pandemic. Fourth, nuclear energy challenge could point on how we can reduce investment costs and how we can flexibly adjust the power generation with smaller capacity so that it can be deployed in many parts of the world to support energy transition. Without further ado, to IAEA, all speakers, all G20 members and invited delegates, and all stakeholders, I wish you all have a successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, for the remarks. Let's now proceed to the keynote address that will be delivered by the Director General of IAEA, Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi. The floor is yours.
It is an honor to speak to you at the IAEA G20 workshop on nuclear potentials in the energy transition in the run-up to this year's G20 meeting. I am pleased that in recent years the IAEA and the G20 have bolstered their cooperation on crucial environmental issues. Together, we are helping to promote evidence-based decision-making crucial to the clean energy transition. At this workshop, you'll learn more about the IAEA's role in fostering sustainable nuclear energy development. For example, the agency establishes and promotes international standards and guidance for the safe and secure use of nuclear energy. It does this in various ways, including through capacity building by producing scientific and technical publications, by assisting member states in energy planning, by facilitating technical cooperation projects, and by coordinating research projects. This work goes to the heart of the IAEA's Atoms for Peace and Development mission. Reliable, affordable, low-carbon energy fuels economic and social development. It is vital to all 17 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We need it to alleviate poverty, improve infrastructure, facilitate access to food, and to support advances in education and technology, all very present at the G20 agenda. As the global population is growing, the demand for water, food, energy is increasing. This is obvious. We need a holistic approach to meet the demand and improve our progress towards our climate goals. Nuclear power is a proven resource. Over the past 5 decades, it has already avoided about 70 gigatons of CO2 and reduced the enormous number of deaths caused by air pollution. Today, as we speak, some 440 nuclear reactors still produce a quarter of the world's low-carbon energy. Meanwhile, as the use of wind and solar has increased, they have integrated seamlessly with nuclear's reliable and flexible base load. Nuclear power can do more than keep our lights on. It can also reduce CO2 emissions generated by industry in non-electrical applications, for example, hydrogen production, industrial steam, or water desalination. And though capital intensive, nuclear is a proven generator of economic and social benefits for a long time. As small modular reactors are developed and deployed, and this is happening sooner than many expect, even more countries and industries will be able to benefit. There's a lot of interest in this area, and the IAEA is actively involved in various ways that you will hear about today. So, I will hold you up no longer and end by firstly thanking you for commitment to our shared goals, and secondly, by wishing you a successful and enjoyable workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi, for the keynote address. Before proceeding to the first session, let me introduce our moderator that will be moderated the free session of our today's webinar. Our moderator today is Mr. Topan Setiadipura as Head of Research Center for Nuclear Reactor Technology Research Organizations on Nuclear Power, National Research and Innovation Agency, Indonesia. He has been a researcher on nuclear since 2009 and has been in several professional positions in research organizations on nuclear energy since 2018. Mr. Topan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Sarah. So, distinguished guests and participants, after our interesting opening ceremony, now we proceed with the three sessions here. First, we start with the session Achieving Net Zero and Sustainable Goals with Nuclear Energy. We have two interesting speakers here. First, Mr. Peter Fraser. He's from IEA, International Energy Agency. He's a consultant, and interestingly, he has a long background in, we can say, fossil energy. So it's interesting speaker in this context. He will speak with the title Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sectors with a focus on the role of nuclear energy. And the second speaker in this session, Mr. Henry Paile. He is Section Head of Planning and Economic Studies at the IAEA. He will deliver the title Nuclear Energy for a Net Zero World. Mr. Peter Fraser, the floor is yours.
good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say, and thank you very much for inviting the IEA to participate in this G20 event on highlighting nuclear potentials and energy transitions. The IEA, as you know, is very deeply involved in G20 collaboration on energy security and its many facets, as well as the work on climate change. Nuclear energy, as you've already heard, is already making a contribution today on both climate and on energy security. Each year of operation of today's power plants is saving 1.5 billion tons of CO2 emissions and displacing about 4% of the world's natural gas demand. But what contribution will it make to tomorrow's clean energy transitions? In the past year, we have seen an important shift in the international discussions when it comes to climate, and in recent months with respect to energy security, with respect to the possible role of nuclear energy. The recent announcements in the UK and France to build new nuclear power plants are an example of that recent shift, in addition to their already large ambitions to expand renewable energy. In this context, the IEA decided to do a new report on nuclear energy aimed at those countries that wish to retain or develop this option. The report, Nuclear Energy and Secure Energy Transitions, will be launched at the end of this month. Today, I just wanted to highlight just a couple of points, which will be examined further in this report. So you've got our slide up there, and the first point is that our focus on net zero emissions energy systems will have on the future of nuclear energy. Will nuclear energy expand from today's level or decline, based on renewables or fossil fuels using carbon capture and storage? In the net zero scenario, the global demand for electricity grows greatly while the use of fossil fuels declines dramatically. In the scenario, there's no use of abated coal for power generation anywhere in the world after 2040. Renewable energies, mainly wind and solar, but also increased hydropower and other renewables, supply nearly 90% of global electricity demand, which is by 2050, 2.7 times larger than it was in 2020. So electricity meets more of our energy needs. The dominance of renewable is reflected by their favorable economics. Wind and solar PV are faster to deploy at very low cost compared to other clean energy alternatives. Indeed, in most parts, PV is the cheapest electricity available, even compared to new coal generation. Yet despite this dominance, nuclear capacity actually doubles between 2020 and 2050. 90% of the growth in capacity in developing economies by China. Advanced economies also invest in nuclear energy. Much of their investment is to replace aging capacity as it retires. Given the favorable economics for wind and solar, it is fair to ask why the scenario sees an expansion of nuclear power. The main answer is that although wind and solar are inexpensive, they are variable sources of electricity generation, not always available. To complement those, you need other resources, particularly dispatchable generation, to balance the system when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. If I can have the next slide, I can show how that works. Oops, sorry, previous one, please. There we go. To illustrate the point, it's a result of some IEA analysis published last year on how a reliable carbon neutral power system would operate in China, shifting from a system largely dominated by fossil fuels to one dominated by renewable energies in 2060. As you can see on the bottom set of bars here, nuclear energy would provide about 10% of the electricity needed by China in 2060. That's up from around 4% today. It also contributes, but quite modestly, to meeting peak demands, with much bigger contributions coming from demand response and energy storage. But nuclear makes a huge contribution close to half in providing stability to the power system in a carbon neutral power system in China 2060. It's really on those that kind of essential system service that nuclear and other large generating plants can play a big role, even in a system dominated by wind and solar. Nuclear contributes to the diversity of the mix, further enhancing energy security. Our new report looks at these, will look at this in more depth, but it goes beyond these questions and examine the potential for nuclear to play a larger role, even envisaged in our net zero emission scenario. To do so, nuclear energy will need to improve its competitiveness. And while there's been positive experience with nuclear power building on time and on budget in China, in Korea, the recent experience in Western economies has not been positive. This will need to change if nuclear is to be fulfilled or enlarge its role. We will also discuss new nuclear technologies, particularly small modular reactors, to supply electricity, heat, and/or hydrogen, and whether the development of these new technologies is actually progressing faster. I hope you will give our report a careful examination when it is released at the end of June. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fraser. Next, Mr. Henry Pyle, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and good evening. Good afternoon and good evening, and I would like to thank the host, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of the Republic of Indonesia, for hosting this very interesting webinar. So the title of my presentation is Nuclear Energy for a Net Zero World, and I will address some of the points that Peter Fraser just addressed in his global presentation on the roadmap to net zero. To get to net zero, as was recently said, we will need a lot of clean electricity, more than a doubling of electricity. We will need to phase out unabated fossil fuels, and we will need to substitute low carbon fuels. We will need to substitute fossil fuels with low carbon fuels, like hydrogen, for example. And we will also need to design energy systems that provide robust, climate resilient, and affordable and secure energy to citizens and industry. I wanted to highlight on the right a recent UN report that had a regional study from Europe, the Economic Commission for Europe, that highlighted that it is possible to design such systems with nuclear, including next generation nuclear power plants, such as small modular reactors. Next slide, please. Why is nuclear an important component of the transitions towards net zero? Well, the first point is nuclear is a low carbon electricity generation technology. 2, it can contribute to sustainable development objectives. It can support the integration of large shares of variable renewables, and we know that there will be a strong expansion of wind and solar. As Peter Fraser said, these are low-cost technologies that can be deployed massively. Nuclear energy can contribute to the security of energy supply, and this is a rising concern across the world. Nuclear energy can help decarbonize beyond electricity, and especially with the use of advanced reactors and small modular reactors. And some of the challenges facing the deployment of nuclear are being addressed. In our latest projections to 2050, published in October last year, we see a doubling of nuclear capacity and generation by 2050. And I just wanted to remind the audience that there are 32 member states operating nuclear power, and about 30 member states at various stages of considering embarking on a nuclear program. Next slide, please. Nuclear is a low-carbon generation technology. I think everybody is now convinced, but I wanted to also point out a recent report from the UN that shows that nuclear has actually the smallest carbon footprint among all low-carbon technologies. We estimated that over the last 5 decades, nuclear has avoided about 70 gigatons of CO2. Next slide, please. Nuclear energy can contribute to sustainable development objectives. We have published studies and reports looking at the specific contribution of nuclear power, but also nuclear technologies. But the 3 main SDGs to which nuclear power can contribute is SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and you will have a presentation in this workshop on the economic impacts of the nuclear investments, and of course climate action. There are issues raised by the general public concerning the management of radioactive waste. There was a landmark report published last year by the European Joint Research Centre that looked at the so-called do no significant harm criteria, especially related to the management of radioactive waste. And they did a very thorough study and showed that there is no scientific evidence that nuclear energy does more harm than any of the other technologies that are already considered in the taxonomy of sustainable activities. Next slide, please. Nuclear can support the integration of large shares of variable renewables. I think Peter Fraser showed how important nuclear is to balancing the grid. And there are also several studies that show that the transitions to net zero systems is less costly when nuclear is part of the mix. Next slide, please. Nuclear can contribute to the security of energy supply, and there are several ways in which it can do that. First of all, the cost of nuclear generation is not very sensitive to the cost of fuel, contrary to electricity produced from coal or gas. Uranium resources are widely available globally, and nuclear fuel can be stored on site of the nuclear power plants. An important consideration as well is that nuclear generation is among the low-carbon technologies that is the least dependent on critical minerals. Finally, we have to consider the impact of climate change and extreme weather events on our energy systems. And IAEA operational data suggests that nuclear power is resilient, and adaptation measures can be deployed to even reduce the vulnerability of nuclear power generation to climate change. Next slide, please. Nuclear energy can help to decarbonize beyond the electricity sector. And this will be presented in more detail in my colleague's presentation related to the use of advanced reactors and small modular reactors. But what you need to remember is that nuclear energy is not only a low carbon source of electricity, but it is also a low carbon source of heat and hydrogen. And there is experience in providing nuclear heat from nuclear. There's a long experience of district heating in several reactors around the world. And advanced reactors, such as high temperature reactors, can deliver high temperature steam for industry. Finally, there is a growing interest in hydrogen as an enabler of the transition to net zero. Nuclear can produce low carbon hydrogen in 2 ways: through electrolysis, like all other low carbon electricity generating technologies, but also through thermal splitting, where both heat and electricity from nuclear are used to split water more efficiently than with low carbon electrolysis, low temperature electrolysis. Next slide, please. Finally, deployment challenges, which are real, are being addressed. First of all, from a policy point of view, with the growing energy and climate crisis, there is a renewed interest in nuclear. Public acceptance. There's more open discussion on nuclear in different fora, including at the COP26 last year, the Climate Change Conference. And this workshop, this webinar from the Energy Transition Working Group is an opportunity also to discuss the challenges and issues related to nuclear power. Cost and access to finance. Cost reductions from first-of-a-kind reactors to nth-of-a-kind are also being observed, and the supply chain is being improved to address those issues. New financing models are being developed. And finally, new technologies and initiatives are being proposed, such as small modular reactors. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry and Peter, for a very nice presentation. Now we have 5-minute Q&A session, actually, from the Webex. We haven't seen any questions, so if I will raise some question, maybe for Peter and Henry. So thank you for presenting the scenario from IEA. As far as I can see, it's the PV and wind in 2050 will be around 60% ratio. So by the discussion between peak load and base load, so is there any minimum ratio, or we can say the ratio which we need to be cautious? I mean, we need to be warning if the ratio is too high. So is 60% ratio is okay from the peak load electricity? Thank you. That's maybe my first.
Thanks for the question. The actual number for the global level is actually 68% wind and solar. And so talk about the combination. Often wind and solar work reasonably well together, so that it would be a very different number if it was all wind, for example, all solar, than the combination of wind and solar. That said, we do start to get concerned as we get this level, 70% or higher. It starts to get quite expensive because your value of adding, say, an additional amount of solar, once you have a lot of solar, is very low. And really all the value is through some other technology like storage to save the energy when it's produced and then use it at a later time. But as we pointed out, it's not just balancing the system. It's actually having enough inertia in the system. It's other properties of the system that you need dispatchable generation like nuclear power. And so it could be fossil fuel with carbon capture that has its own disadvantages. So we see a real advantage in nuclear or technologies like this when as the shares get higher.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So, Henry, would you add to the question, or?
Well, we did some analysis on looking at some electricity markets during the first lockdowns due to the COVID crisis. And during this period where electricity demand fell in many countries, the first technologies to move out of the generation were the fossil fuels. So in countries countries that had nuclear, we had a relatively high share of renewables with nuclear, and this was particularly the case in France, where nuclear is used to load follow and be flexible. And what the operator said was that the situation was already what they had projected the situation to be in 5 years' time or more, with higher shares of renewables. So I would say nuclear passed the test of flexibility to support a grid with high shares of renewables.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe the next will be, of course, the point is we need to optimize both any potential, energy potential, which able to decarbonize our energy system. So we have discussion on hybrid nuclear and renewable. So maybe Peter, what is your suggestion to accelerate this concept to reality, like microgrid, hybrid, nuclear and renewable? Short, maybe. Sorry, we only have 2 minutes.
Okay, then very quickly, when you look at our scenario, we for the short term to move towards net zero, we move more quickly with the wind and the solar. It's just really a timing issue. It just is much quicker to deploy. So if you recognize, as say we see in the UK and France, a need for a lot more nuclear as well, you need to move ahead with the wind and solar, and then the nuclear will catch up over time because of the relative speed of deployment. So there is a complementarity. That complementarity could work very well, and for the countries that want to deploy nuclear as a low carbon dispatchable technology, I can see how that would work. But wind and solar, we need to start working on it now, so it should come first.
Okay, thank you. 1 minute, Henry. Please.
Okay, so I think the point that Peter makes is that first we need to decarbonize the electricity grid, and having wind and solar deployed massively can do that. And of course, nuclear supports decarbonization of the electricity. But at some point, we will need to decarbonize beyond electricity. And I think this is really where nuclear and advanced nuclear technologies can make a difference, because there are not so many ways to decarbonize heat. It's either fossil fuel with CCS, and if not, well, nuclear actually can provide low carbon heat. So I think there are a lot of applications that can be decarbonized thanks to the heat or the hydrogen, or the combination of heat and hydrogen that nuclear can generate. And for me, this is the combination, the right combination of nuclear and renewables.
Okay, thank you very much. It's short but very informative and interesting. Thank you very much, Peter and Henry, for a very nice session. So, dear distinguished guests and participants, we finished our first session. We proceed directly to our second session. In the first session, we have visionized that nuclear is really an important instrument for the energy transition. In this session, we have nuclear energy option for emerging economies. So hopefully we can have more pictures on the technology option and experience of specific countries. We have three speakers. First, Stefano Monti from IAEA. He's the section head of Nuclear Power Technology Development Section, Department of Nuclear Energy of IAEA. He will speak on behalf of Ms. Aline, which is the head of Department of Nuclear Energy. The title from Stefano Monti will be Nuclear Technology Options, including SMR opportunities in the energy transition, such as non-electrical application, smaller networks, and micro-reactors. Then our second is the host in this event, Ms. Andrea Febi Misna. She is the director for various new and renewable energy in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resource of Republic Indonesia. She will speak on behalf of Mr. Dadan Kusdiana. The title would be Indonesia's Nuclear Development, Current Updates and Future Direction. And the last speaker of this session will be His Excellencies Ambassador Hamad Al-Kaabi. He is permanent representative of the UAE to the IAEA and also to the United Nations Organization. He will speak about an example of UAE nuclear program. Mr. Stefano Monti, the floor is yours.
Morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really grateful to the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Republic of Indonesia for having organized this interesting webinar of nuclear potentials in energy transitions. So today I'm asked to talk very briefly about the nuclear technology options. In the current energy market, nuclear power has the possibility to expand if and only if it will be competitive, in particular with other clean energy options, and also flexible. If you can, please go ahead with it. Thank you. And this is even more true if you consider the case of embarking countries. where grid capacity and energy distribution is limited. We have also to consider the increasing penetration of variable renewables, which calls for increasing need for nuclear power plant to be operated in flexible modes. So it has been already observed that for their specific features, SMR are considered particularly suitable to operate in such flexible modes. However, it's clear that large advanced water-cooled reactor will continue to operate for several decades and even to be constructed. So it's very important to integrate SMR and large water-cooled reactor in a synergetic way for power and heat generation. So in the next slide, you can see what is the current offer from several technology holders. Please, next slide. Yeah, when you can see some of the advanced water-cooled reactors offered by vendors. Basically, there are large water-cooled reactors available on the market and all over the world. Next slide, please. Already the previous speakers has highlighted the importance for nuclear power to address not only power generation, but also heat generation. And the reason is that there is a need to decarbonize several industrial sectors. And basically, depending on the output temperature of the reactor, nuclear power plant of different technologies can be used for instance, district heating, desalination, methanol production, petroleum refining, hydrogen production. We can say that the higher is the output temperature of the reactor, the larger is the number of possible industrial applications. But one has to observe that it's possible to go higher in temperature only with advanced or better innovative reactors, and some of them are still under development. Next slide, please. Again, already mentioned is the hydrogen production is of particular interest, for instance, to decarbonize some hard to abate sector. And for sure, nuclear energy is in a good position to support the hydrogen economy because it's able to provide large quantity of green hydrogen. Basically, any nuclear power plant can produce a hydrogen, as a nuclear power plant provides both heat and electricity. However, we have to recognize that there are still some challenges which has to be addressed, for instance, from an economic viewpoint, licensability, and also some technology issues. So, large commercial scale deployment of hydrogen is expected in next decade. And not only because of nuclear power, also the other technologies are more or less in the same position. So coming back now to the question of next slide, please, of SMR and their role. Well, first of all, what are these SMR? How we define SMR? SMR are advanced reactors that produce typically up to 300 megawatt electrical, which is an indicative number because we know that some vendors prefer, for instance, to propose a unit with a higher power capacity. But what is really peculiar is that SMR are expected to be built in factories and then transported as modules to the sites for installation according to the demand. Because of their characteristic and because they are small, they are expected to have a lower upfront capital cost and to pursue the so-called economy of serial production. They are constructed in module, so another feature is this multi-module approach and modular construction. They are particularly suitable for some application, for instance, in remote regions or in some embarking countries where there is not really a very well developed electrical grid. in principle, because of their safety characteristic and also because of their reduced source term, there is a room to, let's say, reduce the emergency planning zone. And obviously, if we replace, for instance, aging fossil fire plants with SMR, obviously we reduce the CO2 production. And finally, again, because of their flexibility, they are particularly suitable to be integrated with renewables in so-called integrated energy system, which also include other non-electric application of nuclear power that we have already mentioned. Next slide, please. What is the status of the SMR development deployment? There are a couple of SMR under operation in Russia and in China, and other 4 under construction of different technology. In particular, we know the CAREM IPWR in Argentina, the CP100 in China, and the Brest 300 and the Ritmen 200 in Russia. And then there are a number of other units which are expected to be operated at least as a first unit, as a first of a kind, by the end of this decade. So in general, we can say that this decade will be dedicated for the safety and performance demonstration of these SMR, whilst the larger deployment of SMR is expected beyond 2030 and also beyond 2040. Next slide, please. Well, a particular case, which actually is already, we have a case already in operation, are the floating nuclear power plants. They are interesting for some remote regions, in particular to support the population in remote industrial territory. They can provide a reliable and clean heat and electricity. So in such a way, they can supply population in remote regions also for industrial application. Next slide, please. Another niche market is represented by so-called microreactors. What are these microreactors? Is a specific case of small modular reactor with an installed capacity in the range of between 1 and 10 megawatt electrical, and their particular, their specific issues that they can be even completely realized in a workshop, and then transported. Means the whole reactor can be transported to site for operation. So they are particularly suitable for remote sites, for instance, mining operation, island communities, oil platforms, and maritime shipping. And there are, we have seen recently that there is really a growing interest in this technology with possibility for deployment in remote areas, basically in all over the world, in the Southeast Asian archipelagos, in North America, in Middle East, and even in Africa. With that, I think that my presentation is concluded, and over to you, to the chairman.
Okay, thank you, Stefano, Mr. Stefano Monti, for the informative and nice presentation. So we proceed to our second presenter here, Ms. Fabi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon from Jakarta. Thank you very much for joining us in G20 webinar series on nuclear potential in energy transition. It is a great honor for me to share with you briefly current update of Indonesian nuclear power development and future direction. In this opportunity, firstly, I will talk about nuclear legal framework in Indonesia. After that, I will show you nuclear power infrastructure development and readiness phase. And then the last, I will go on to our net zero emission roadmap. Next, please. Regarding our legal framework for nuclear development, we have at least 4 laws as a base for nuclear development in the country. These are law number 10, issued in 1997 on nuclear energy, law number 17, issued in 2007 on National Long-Term Development Plan, law number 30, issued in 2007 on energy, and the new one is law number 11, 2020 on job creation. These laws are also accompanied with government regulation number 79, 2014 on national energy policy, and presidential regulation number 22, 2017 on national energy green plan. Indonesia's commitment to the safety, secure, and safeguard implementation of nuclear power is clearly indicated by nuclear law, which underpins the importance of the use of nuclear energy for national development. Any nuclear-related activity should take into account the following aspects. The first one is safety, and then security and peace, worker health, and the surrounding community and environment. To highlight the national commitment to the use of nuclear energy, the government issued law number 17/2007 on the National Long-Term Development Plan for 2005-2025. This law stipulates that nuclear power should be utilized with high consideration on safety. And in Article 11, paragraph 3 of Government Regulation number 79, year 2014 of the regulation imply the use of nuclear power as a last resource. However, if some conditions are met, such as an extensively study has been carried out, the fulfillment of increasing energy needs, the provision of national energy on large scale, reducing carbon emission, and there is urgent interest to deploy nuclear power, then basically nuclear energy can be implemented. Now we will move to nuclear power infrastructure development and readiness phase. Next slide, please. As you can see from the figure, Indonesia is still at the phase 1 of the IAEA milestone. In accordance with the Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission to review the status of Indonesia's national nuclear infrastructure by the IAEA from 19 points of nuclear energy infrastructure. In phase 1, around 16 items are ready to phase 2, while the other 3 items are not yet ready for phase 2. The 3 infrastructure are national position, management, and also stakeholder involvement. As a follow-up to the IAEA recommendation at the Emission in 2009, Indonesia is currently preparing to establish a NEPIO. A preparatory team for the establishment of NEPIO has been formed by our minister, which will formulate the presidential regulation for the establishment of NEPIO, including its duties and structure. The establishment of NEPIO through the presidential decree is expected to clarify our national position and management issue. An updated self-evaluation to nuclear infrastructure readiness has also been done in 2021, coordinated by our National Atomic Energy Agency, Batan, currently BRIN. And then now we turn to our net zero emission roadmap on energy sector. Next, please. In line with the government commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emission, we have developed the roadmap toward net zero emission 2060 on energy sector. And our minister already presented the roadmap in the COP26 held in the Glasgow last year. To achieve the target of net zero emission, we have to develop all resources that we have, including nuclear. From this graph, we can see that solar energy is dominated in energy transition. The coal will reduce gradually in 2030, and also the other resource of renewable energy will develop. And from this graph, we can also see that nuclear energy will also become a part of our future energy system. We plan nuclear will be connected to the grid in 2049 to maintain system reliability and will reach the capacity around 35 gigawatt by 2060. Next, please. I think this is my last slide to summarize what I present before. The effort to address the climate change in Indonesia are represented by the directive of the President to encourage energy transition toward clean energy and green economy. The directives are then translated into 3 term targets: 23% new renewable energy and energy mix in 2025, and then 29% emission reduction in 2030, and net zero emission in 2060. The focus of energy transition are illustrated on a roadmap that mandated massive renewable energy development, gradual retirement of steam power plant, and reduction of carbon emission through reducing fossil energy consumption. Nuclear energy is the key to achieve global net zero objective, as mentioned by previous speaker, that it's not only as baseload, but also to provide the clean energy. Working in partnership with renewable energy source and other low carbon options as part of sustainable energy system to decarbonize electricity and non-electric energy production. Indonesia will continue to deepen cooperation with the IAEA in the use of nuclear technology for peaceful use, especially to overcome the climate change. And thank you very much for your support to us in the nuclear program. I stop here. Thank you very much. I pass back to moderator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Febi, for a nice presentation. Next, His Excellency Ambassador Hamad Al-Kabi. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for hosting me today, and thanks for the Ministry of Energy and Minerals of Indonesia on this very important seminar and good line of speakers that I already listened to some of them. The story of the UAE actually follows very well what's been discussed in earlier from the experts on why nuclear energy is important, how we got there. So if I take you back to 2007 in particular, where we started our energy planning studies, it was at the time a very generic planning for energy. So first we looked at the energy demand and how much electricity we need in the next years and a decade and so. The result from that study at the time was the electricity demand will continue to increase at a very aggressive level. So from 2007 to 2020, it was projected to be almost 3 times increase. So it's very rapid increase of electricity demand. So naturally, the government directed at the time to look at what options do we have to meet this demand. And at the time in 2007 and around that period, the UAE was heavily dependent on natural gas. This natural gas also was mostly an imported natural gas from through the pipeline to the UAE from Qatar, and the percentage at the time was about 65% of our gas that's used in the electricity sector was actually imported. So we were a net importer of natural gas at the time. So looking at to find more gas to supplement this increase in demand was not really feasible looking at the national or domestic resources. So we have to look at options outside. And this is where we started exploring some of the technology alternatives or options that can be deployed to meet this increase in demand. And of course, we believe hydrocarbon, natural gas in particular, will continue to play an important role. But then we also needed an additional one that could supplement this. And we've looked at, obviously, renewables, solar in particular, which we are pursuing very aggressively, as you can see from also our initiatives and our plants that are already operating. But then that's also not enough. We needed some baseload technology, as we heard in the presentation earlier today, something that fills the bottom part of the energy demand curve, basically. And that's when nuclear energy starts becoming an interesting choice for the UAE to look at, given the commercial viability of or the cost of such energy, but also the contribution to environment and consider its consideration as a clean energy source. But then, of course, the base load concept of nuclear energy is very attractive, given how the UAE economy is growing, as well as the tremendous increase in electricity demand. So, of course, at the time, we looked at nuclear energy, and we had absolutely no experience previously on what is and how to develop nuclear energy, and there's no infrastructure to support the development of nuclear energy. And as a result of that, the government instructed us at the time, the team responsible for this energy planning study, to evaluate the potential option of nuclear energy. In particular, can we deploy it in the UAE? If we deploy it, at what cost, what requirements, what needs to be done, what infrastructure needs to be in place. And that's, I think, when we started looking at the International Atomic Energy as a good partner to understand these requirements. And somebody earlier mentioned the milestones approach, which was at the time a very early stage of the development. We looked at the milestones approach in terms of what is needed to be in place for such program to be deployed. We looked also at other countries' experience and past experience from the global industry around the world. And then we also developed what we refer to on a national level as a roadmap, which is technically a milestones approach customized as an implementation plan for the UAE. It highlighted a feasible schedule for the program if to be deployed in the UAE. It highlighted high-level policy commitment in terms of safety, security, non-proliferation. It also highlighted some urgent items that needs to be started, such as establishment of the legislation, establishment of the regulatory authority, as well as finding a site and start looking at commercial entities or the project companies that will manage and be responsible for the implementation of the nuclear power project. So everything went well in terms of planning and defining the roles and responsibility. We issued the nuclear policy in 2008. That was really the start of putting the high-level framework for the nuclear program. In 2009, we have a nuclear law issued, which also established an independent nuclear regulator. We have acquired a lot of expertise to get the program running and to start to have that initial capacity with the program. In 2009, we also, late in 2009, the first contract for the 4 nuclear power plants started or contracted. And then 2012, the first unit construction started, and then followed by 3 other units. And today, in 2022, we have already 2 reactors operational, and then 1 already very close to be commissioned. 4th one is also in the pipeline to be commissioned sometimes soon, as well as the status now in the advanced stages of construction. So on the government side, we have a very full-fledged regulatory and safety framework, working closely with the IAEA, with a lot of technical cooperation program that developed and train our people, but also help us in understanding the international practices, implementing international agreements, peer reviews, expert reviews, many of them done over the years. You can recall at least 10 major peer reviews mission that allowed us to evaluate our progress. On the industry side, we have to establish full industry, basically, that responsible for the project and associated services. We have a lot of people being trained abroad, working in other projects like in Korea and the US, overseeing construction and management of construction project abroad. So this whole project came together, but then here I'd like to mention how important it was to get the assistance and cooperation from the IAEA, but also our international partners, countries who already have major expertise on this. So now where do we fit in terms of 4 reactors? These are supposed to contribute, once they are fully operational, about 25% of the UAE electricity demand, which translates to almost or removal of almost 3 million cars per year in terms of moving to clean energy. So as we started with the operation of the first 2 units, the impact of these reactors on the energy mix, but also on the our efforts to fight climate change has been tremendous shift, I would say, in terms of UAE efforts. Of course, it's also gave the UAE a lot of credits in terms of meeting the climate goals and the international commitments in this area. So I'll stop here, but this is just a rough view on where we are and how we started.
Thank you, Ambassador Hamad Al-Kabi, for your nice speech on the UAE project on nuclear. So we have 5-minute question and answer session here. May I start from the last presenter, Ambassador Hamad Al-Kabi. As far as I heard from your speech, the nuclear initiative started 2007. So if you start 2007, that's an important things happened in 2011, which is Fukushima accident. So is there any pressure which want to stop the initiative, the nuclear initiative in UAE, and how the government mitigate this pressure to stop the initiative? Thank you.
Sure, that was a very interesting time, obviously, because when Fukushima happened, we were at the nuclear regulator in the UAE very close to issue the construction license for the first unit. And as you can imagine, the international outlash on nuclear after the Fukushima accident, it was in the media, the public was asking a lot of questions, international coverage, and so on. So naturally, I remember actually having multiple meetings on this issue to decide how we do this and how to deal with this challenge, right? And of course, when we had the discussion with the senior leaders of the government, the instruction was clear: safety, 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 right? And this was really a clear guidance for us. And luckily, we have a very good infrastructure and policy that puts safety at the highest commitment. So it was in the government policy that a program can only be pursued if it meets the high standards of safety. And this is where, in the technical discussion, we decided to see, okay, what do we have so far in terms of lessons learned internationally? And in particular from Fukushima accident, is there any immediate lessons learned that we can take up and implement in the UAE in terms of design, in terms of procedures, but also if there is any additional thing. So at the time, the European started what we refer to as the stress test. Multiple countries started the stress test at the time. So we adopted the European methodology, because it was at the time the most advanced in terms of requirements and also methodology and so on. So we adopted that, and as a regulator, we requested from the operator as a condition for the construction, for the operational license, for the construction license, to have a list of conditions to be implemented as a result of Fukushima. So these are lessons learned, design changes, additional safety elements, and then they are conditional that the operational license will not be issued unless these full list has been implemented, in addition to any additional lessons learned from international discussion. So it was a rough time, but I think if you have a clear policy that says safety first, you can easily come down from that target and implement a very systematic approach to move on.
Okay, thank you very much. Very nice experience. My next question may be to Stefano Monti, if I may. So, you said it's about a decade to hydrogen based on nuclear cogeneration. So the question will be, how can we accelerate this? How can we have hydrogen which comes from nuclear cogeneration? I mean, we, Indonesia, actually part of a technical working group on gas-cooled reactor. We followed many of progress here, in which STGR is one of the reactor for this application. But again, how far and how can we accelerate this as single countries or maybe together as a member state of IAEA? Please, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said during my short presentation, there are different technologies which can be used to produce hydrogen, also with nuclear. Well, typically, we can categorize in two main ones, starting from electricity or from heat. Okay? Electricity, also the current nuclear power plant produce electricity in a massive amount. So, of course, using electrolyzer, we can produce a hydrogen even today. And as you may know, there are industrial initiatives in several parts of the world, in China, in the US, in Russia, that they want to pursue this way and produce a hydrogen even in a massive amount using electricity from the current nuclear power plant. Then, of course, we can do better and in a more efficient way if we use the so-called, you mentioned, the so-called high-temperature gas-cooled reactor. Well, there is a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, a modern high-temperature gas-cooled reactor already in operation in China. It's a modular HTGR, which, of course, is a promising technology also for hydrogen production. We expect that the possibility to produce hydrogen through high-temperature thermochemical process with this kind of reactor will happen only when there will be a broad, let's say, deployment of this technology. So maybe in a later stage. However, I wanted to stress the fact, and this is true not only for nuclear energy, it is true for energy, for any energy sources useful for hydrogen production. It's not only about the production. Hydrogen economy is a complex issue. It means also to be able to store the hydrogen in an effective way. It's a question of transportation of hydrogen. Hydrogen is the lightest element in nature and can flow everywhere. Even, for instance, the current piping for gas are not suitable for pure hydrogen. It has to be mixed. So what has to be considered when we talk about hydrogen production with nuclear energy or any other energy source is the full economy of hydrogen, not only the production, for which, for sure, the nuclear energy is a very convenient option and completely clean, because there are some other processes with, for instance, the steam methane reforming, broadly used today, which is not completely clean.
Okay, thank you very much for a very nice insight on these topics. So thank you for all the speakers. Really sorry, I'm not questioning Ms. Fabi here. It's not that I'm unfair here, but due to the time limitation, sorry, I can only have 2 questions here. Again, thank you very much for all the speakers. A great session we have.
Pleasure.
So we need to proceed to the next session. So again, dear distinguished guests and participants, we proceed now to the last session, nuclear infrastructure development, enabling factors and challenges. We have 3 speakers here. First, Ms. Liliana Dulinets. She is section head of nuclear infrastructure development of IAEA with the title, The Milestone Approach to Build a Safe and Sustainable National Nuclear Power Infrastructure. And second speaker will be Ms. Jane Geraldo Abaya. She is the Director of Division of Asia and the Pacific of the IAEA, with the title IAEA Technical Cooperation Program for Sustainable Development, focused on energy and human resource development. And our last speaker in this session is Mr. Monkey Lee. He's the principal researcher from Korean Atomic Energy Research Institute. He will speak about economic benefits of nuclear programs. Ms. Liliana Dulinet, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's my pleasure to participate in this section and to present milestone approach to build a safe and sustainable nuclear power program. Next slide, please. Today, nuclear power produces about 10% of the world's electricity, and 32 countries currently operated NPTs. 30 countries also are considering or embarking on new nuclear power program to diversify their energy mix and to reduce green gas emissions. And several newcomer countries are interested in small modular reactors. Next, please. This slide shows the number of reactors under construction. In total, 53 nuclear power reactors are under construction and 9 of them are in newcomer countries. There are 2 units already connected to the grid and operating in 2 newcomer countries, in Belarus and in Arabic Emirates. In addition to these 2 newcomer countries, Bangladesh and Turkey are constructing countries, and Egypt is preparing for the construction. Next slide, please. Nuclear power is a long-term commitment that requires strong national leadership, as in fact the program will need a strong support from the government all along the different phases of the program. A successful nuclear power program requires commitment of at least 100 years. Past experience and practice shows that the lead time for a nuclear power program is between 10 to 50 years, including a construction time. The leadership should ensure coordination and broad political and public support. The high standards of safety, security, and safeguards must be applied, as well as the international legal instruments such as liability in case of accident, safeguards instruments for non-proliferation, and others. Next slide, please. Following the growing interest to nuclear power, IAEA developed the milestone document. Member states that have decided to start a nuclear power program or to expand an existing one may use this IAEA milestone approach as a program management guide. Milestone approach includes 3 phases. Phase 1 is consideration phase, where a country conducts several studies to make knowledgeable decision to include nuclear power in the energy mix. Phase 2 is a preparatory phase for the program and for the NPT project, and phase 3 is the main implementation phase, where contracting and construction of the NPT is done. It is a comprehensive and phased approach which considers 19 infrastructure issues that need to be developed in order to support the implementation of nuclear power program. Next slide, please. These 19 infrastructure issues need to be carefully thought of and developed. There are physical infrastructure elements such as facilities and equipment, and soft infrastructure elements such as legal, financial, institutional, human, and regulatory framework. The nuclear power program will not be realized if the 90 infrastructure issues are not adequately addressed. Next slide, please. For the nuclear power program implementation, The milestone approach identifies three main organizations with major responsibilities. Government, through the NEPIO, is responsible for formulating policies and strategies and for overall coordination of the program. A regulatory body is responsible for defining the requirements for safety, security, and safeguards, and for ensuring that the requirements have been met by the owner-operator. Owner-operator is responsible for constructing and operating the nuclear power plant. In addition to those key organizations, there are a number of organizations involved in the program with different roles, and you see them on the screen. Next slide, please. Agency has established a fruitful cooperation with newcomer countries. As an example, this slide presents cooperation with Indonesia, country which is hosting G20. You see some of our activities on the screen, such as Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission, which was conducted in 2009, and Integrated Regulatory Review Service Mission in 2015, and other activities in the frame of technical cooperation projects. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see a peer review and advisory services in the area of nuclear power program that IAEA provides for newcomer countries. First of all, you see there is Integrated Nuclear Infrastructure Review Mission. Since 2009 until now, ENIR mission took place 34 times at 24 member states. Other missions such as SEED, IRRS, IPREP, ISAS, and others are focused on the specific topics which are important for safe, secure, and sustainable nuclear power program implementation. Please, next slide. Apart from the assessment mission, IAEA has other well-developed mechanisms for supporting embarking countries. IAEA provides interregional and national training and capacity building, enhances the understanding in member states of their obligations and responsibilities. Also, agency created 19 e-learning modules for nuclear power infrastructure development. They cover most of the 19 infrastructure issues. Additionally, you can see the nuclear infrastructure bibliography. It is the web resources that collects of all key documents in additional reference materials for each of the 19 infrastructure issues. It includes IAEA safety standards, nuclear security series, nuclear energy series, IAEA services series, covering safeguards, other IAEA publications that provide guidance on different topics. So next, please. And finally, let me underline that milestone approach is a well-developed guidance for nuclear power program implementation and a framework for embarking countries. IAEA provides integrated support to embarking countries throughout guidance, training, and review services. All these mechanisms ensure safe, secure, and sustainable nuclear power program implementation. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Liliana Dulinet, for very informative presentation. Thank you. So we proceed to the next speaker, Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya. Ms. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day, everyone. It is really an honor for me to join you today and address a very important issue of our time and of the future, the sustainable goals of energy. The IAEA is an independent intergovernmental science and technology-based organization now serving 173 member states. It is mandated to accelerate and enlarge the contribution of atomic energy to peace, health, and prosperity throughout the world. This mandate is delivered through the IAEA's Technical Cooperation Program, the main mechanism through which safe, secure, and peaceful use of nuclear technology is transferred for the major sustainable development priorities of the member states. My talk will focus on human capacity building for energy development through the Technical Cooperation Program. Next slide, please. As of today, a total of 146 member states, 38 of which in Asia and the Pacific, are taking part in the TC program through national, regional, as well as interregional projects, including the current ones on SMRs, where South-South, North-South, and triangular cooperation is promoted. The TC program, please next slide, is based on the principle of shared responsibility between the IAEA and member states. It is demand-driven. It is thus designed to address an area of defined need expressed in the country program frameworks signed between the country and the IAEA. Recognizing the need for synergies, the TC program operates through financial, technical, and strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. Nuclear science and technology has been demonstrated to contribute directly to 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, a target that we all share. This slide here reflects the areas currently supported by the program according to the priorities set by the member states. While food and agriculture, as well as health and nutrition, followed by safety, dominates the program, energy, mainly for nuclear power development by member states, is also covered. Any application of nuclear technology requires a robust radiation safety infrastructure to ensure safe use of radiation. The majority of the member states in Asia and the Pacific are non-nuclear power countries. Nevertheless, it is the region where nuclear power development is most pronounced, where 8 countries are embarking or expanding on nuclear power programs, and the technical cooperation support is provided in accordance with the milestones approach. Next slide, please. It is important to highlight that the availability of skilled staff is essential for energy development. Education and training in nuclear science and technology builds a better understanding of its uses for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It can also address common issues such as public concern about nuclear power. TC program thus builds national human resource capabilities through training courses, workshops, and individual or group fellowships. Expert missions and scientific visits provide the support to develop and share experiences amongst member states. The program also provides equipment and materials to strengthen the capacities of institutions. Next slide, please. Additionally, as you have heard, the IAEA offers a suite of support services to its member states with existing nuclear power programs. The program with UAE is one of the most concrete examples of a journey to success. You have already heard from Ambassador Al-Kaibi about this. The Technical Cooperation Program also supports countries that are developing infrastructure for a program, as we currently do for Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia, and several others. Nowadays, member states have been showing increasing interest in SMRs, and the new interregional projects aim to raise awareness on SMR technologies and their applications. Next slide, please. Specific to nuclear power development, the TC support covers all the areas of the milestones approach, which was presented by my colleague previously. It is designed to strengthen government, regulatory body, NEPI relationship. While the interregional and regional projects provide opportunities to build awareness for embarking and expanding countries, tailored support is provided through national projects. To date, for example, about 1,200 participants have received training through 77 individual activities, including courses, group scientific visits, workshops, and fellowships that are hosted by 15 institutions in 12 member states. During COVID-19 pandemic, most of the activities were held virtually and in fact including specialized topics like waste decommissioning that enabled maximum participation from the countries. Nowadays, we also start with in-person training. Next slide, please. Likewise, there are annual recurring educational opportunities for a master's program or a PhD towards a PhD degree. And several activities are planned in the coming months. For example, like the workshop on economic competitiveness and marketability, bankability of SMR, etc., which will be held here at the IAEA headquarters. And in addition, in collaboration with partner institutions like the Asian Development Bank, we also jointly organize courses on energy planning using the IAEA tools. Next slide, please. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reiterate that the availability of well-trained human resources is a cornerstone for the sustainability of the peaceful use of nuclear technologies, particularly for energy development. Education can help the general public, the decision makers, and all stakeholders understand the why of nuclear and develop the competence in the use of nuclear technologies. Early education in secondary and tertiary levels can spark student interest in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, the foundations of nuclear science and technology. It is important to start early, create a nucleus, a core group, and connect the nuclear sector with academic institutions. We did this successfully through a regional project for secondary schools in Asia and the Pacific and reached 1 million students in 2019. In fact, we are now working with several member states in the region to continue this initiative to tertiary level to the International Nuclear Science and Technology Academy in Asia and the Pacific. Such strategic approach can overcome the challenges of growing needs, unavailability of human resources, and above all, enhance understanding that can transform aversion to appreciation for all things nuclear. I also like to add that the IAEA's Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellowship Program aims to increase the number of women in the nuclear field. In the same vein, the IAEA regional training activities for women educators and communicators impartially teach how nuclear science and technology is helping to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals for benefiting mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to close with this important message that for only through the young and the next generation can dreams be fulfilled and the world can be prosperous with clean, affordable, and sustainable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya, for a very nice presentation. We proceed to the last presenter in this session, Mr. Monkey Lee. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon from South Korea. Thank you very much for inviting me to this valuable workshop. I'd like to share with you the economic benefits of nuclear programs from the experience of Republic of Korea. Next, please. This is an overall picture of economic development and nuclear power in Korea. Korea has experienced remarkable economic development over the past 40 years. The per capita income increased from less than $2,000 in 1981 to more than $30,000 in 2020. During this period, number of nuclear power plants increases from 1 to 24 units. There are several contributors to the economic development. I'm sure one of them is nuclear. Next slide, please. The role of nuclear has traditionally been addressed in the framework of energy supply. Today, I would like to address the role of nuclear from the perspective that nuclear is one of the economic sectors constituting a national economy. Economic sectors are interrelated with each other through their economic activities. For that reason, an investment in a sector gives rise to ripple effects on other economic sectors by stimulating their own supply chain. Next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you outcomes from several studies done in the past on this issue. The first one is the IAEA publication titled Nuclear Technology and Economic Development in the Republic of Korea. Next slide, please. Investments associated with MPP construction in Korea was roughly on the rising trend over the study period from 1980 to 2005. This trend tells us that investment became more activated as the localization rate was improved over the period. Next slide, please. This slide shows which industries were dominantly affected in terms of output and value added by MPP construction. In 1980, electric power plant construction and finance and insurance are the only two sectors that have seen the most outputs and value added. In 2005, your right-hand side, as the country approached technological self-sufficiency in MPP construction, several new sectors were added to include primary metal products, general machinery and equipment, electronic and other electric equipment, and business services. Next slide, please. This is a sectoral contribution from the operation of nuclear power. In 1980, inorganic basic chemical products and finance and insurance are the only dominantly affected sectors. In 2005, repair construction and business services were added to the list. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the study. In 2005, a gross contribution of nuclear power to the GDP amounted to 2.1% of GDP. The incremental contribution to GDP, considering the substitution between nuclear and fossil fuel power, was estimated to be 0.6 to 0.7% of the GDP, which is lower than gross contribution as expected. This means that GDP in Korea would have fallen by 0.6 to 0.7% if fossil fuel power had been introduced instead of nuclear power. Next slide, please. The next one is the final report of IAEA CRP on this issue. I will share with you the summary of a Korean case study extracted from this report. Next slide, please. In this study, negative contribution to GDP was estimated if all the nuclear powers operating in 2009 would have been replaced with coal power. This negative contribution can be regarded as an incremental contribution of nuclear technology. It is estimated to 0.57% of GDP at 10% electricity price rise due to structural change in power sector, which is business as usual case in 2009. It is noted that the incremental contribution is similar to the estimate in the previous study. Let me tell you the prototype of Empower developed by the IAEA was used to these estimates. Next slide, please. The last one is the case study on regional economic loss from permanent shutdown Gori Nuclear Power Plant 1 in Korea. Gori Plant 1, the first nuclear power plant in Korea, whose design lifetime is 30 years, came to an end in 2007. As a life extension of another 10 years was approved, the plant continued to make electricity before it was permanently shut down in 2017. At that time, many studies strongly supported for the operation of the plant because the performance of the plant was very good in both economical and technological aspects. However, normal life extension was allowed. The decision was made purely from the perspective of political aspects. And next slide. The previous slide, please. GRDP loss in the county where the plant is sited was estimated to $70 million in a year, which accounted for 1.5% of the GRDP in 2018. The economic loss in the region multiplied to $160 million for the whole country because economic sectors are interconnected between regions. At this moment, I'd like to quote an interesting saying that thief does not reduce national income. It just transfers income from individuals to him, keeping national income as it is. But wrong economic policy contributes to the reduction of the national income. In this sense, a policymaker who implements a wrong economic policy is worse than a thief. Next slide, please. I'd like to conclude my presentation by saying that the empirical case studies indicate significant economic benefits of nuclear programs in Korea. Terima kasih. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mangkili, for a very nice presentation, and thank you for all the presenters in this session. We have a question from Webex. There's two questions, but maybe this is for, actually this is for Ms. Lilia Dulinets, but I think Ms. Jane Gerardo Abaya also may contribute in this, to answer this question. The question is, what is the three most important factors to assure the government to invest in nuclear in energy, means to make a national commitment in nuclear energy? Three more stops, so maybe I think we can have, because yeah, start with Liliana, Miss Liliana Dulinets, maybe. Please, Miss.
So, as dear colleague, as I said in my presentation, country first of all should considering about necessary of nuclear power program implementation, and we agency has very well developed mechanism for such kind of support to the country, and I think we cannot do, how to say only about three very important aspects, and if a country decided to implement nuclear power program, as I said, this country should develop all 19 infrastructure issues, and these issues connect with each other. So, and of course, maybe on the first stage, it's very important national position. I mean, very strong support from the government. Of course, it's very important during all nuclear power program implementation during 100 years, but at the first phase, very, very important. So, and also it's very important aspect to have relevant specialists for nuclear power program, because very often for newcomer countries it's a huge problem. And it's very important, for example, to start from some support to create such kind of, maybe to start some preparing specialists in university. So, and of course it's very important to assess energy needs in country. So, and many other aspects, as I said, should be very carefully considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lilia Dulinas. Maybe Ms. Jen Gerardo Abaya can add to these topics.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, in addition to what my colleague Liliana has already mentioned, we provide a lot of support to the technical cooperation program, starting from energy planning, when countries would want to know the demand and the supply for energy requirements of the country. And throughout, when decisions are made to go forward, let's say for nuclear power development, we use the milestones approach, quite extensive, I must say, with all the various issues for supporting countries develop their capabilities in order to move forward. Of course, with emphasis on all of the various issues, but especially particularly for ensuring that you have a government regulatory body, NEPU, strong capabilities. And of course, safety here is very important, and that is why it's very much integrated in this milestones approach. We also provide, as I have mentioned in my presentation, nowadays a lot of interest related to SMRs, and when member states are trying to really understand the technology and its various applications and its uses, that's very much a part of the technical cooperation program. And the two interregional projects that we have provide opportunities for member states to take part and understand and exchange views and get all the necessary capabilities that each one must have in order to make a good decision, of course, on the way forward.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And for Mr. Mankili, maybe one different question. Usually some resistance for the nuclear energy is they say that all the technology is imported from outside the countries. So they will be glad if some industry came from local industry. So in Korean experience, which industry support initially in the initial entrance of nuclear energy long time ago? I mean, which industry which is based on local Korean industry, and maybe what is the last industries which Korean able to localize finally for the nuclear reactor technology?
Okay, thank you for your interesting question. Okay, as I explained, okay, in 1981, the per capita income was very low. Okay? This means that we have no strong industry at that time, okay, to support the nuclear technology. So Korea is very well known for being industrious, and people are being very industrious and eager to learn. Okay, this means that this forms the formation of human capital. Even though the country was suffered from physical capital, okay, Korea developed human capital. That is one of the reasons. And the other one is that paradoxically, okay, Korea is not endowed in natural resources. So we import almost all energy resources abroad. So this means that sometimes the shortage of energy resources, okay, by making nuclear technology introduced, contribute to the development of economy. This is a paradoxical. And so one of the important things is political stability also. Okay, sometimes the incentives are not aligned between politics and economic development. Okay, so in this sense, strong political stability is a very important one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mankili, and that's conclude this last session, which also conclude our 3 session. Hopefully, we can get fruitful knowledge and triggered more effort in spreading and implementing nuclear energy. Thank you very much. I return the floor to Ms. Sarah. Please, Ms. Sarah.
Thank you to all speakers and moderator. We hope that the engaging discussion and exploration we are holding today could turn into concrete actions. Now let's listen to the conclusion of today's session as well as the way forward after this webinar. Please welcome Deputy Director General and Head of the Department of Technical Cooperation, IAEA, Mr. Hua Liu.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm very pleased to join you today at the IAEA G20 workshop on nuclear potentials in energy transition. This event showcased the vital role of nuclear power in energy transition. It has also bolstered cooperation and action between G20 member states on these important topics. I thank you all for your attendance today. It truly shows that strong commitment that your government have in considering opportunities to create a bright and more sustainable future for all. Today, you listen to the discussion on the contribution of nuclear energy to achieve net zero and the sustainable development goals. Examine the nuclear energy options for emerging economies and consider nuclear infrastructure and development. The IAEA provides support in each of these topic areas. Within the framework of Regional Technical Cooperation Project, the IAEA supports member states considering or planning to introduce or expand nuclear power program. We provide support for the development of a sustainable national infrastructure required for safe, secure, and peaceful nuclear power program. Member states received technical assistance to create an enabling environment to facilitate the safe, secure, and sustainable introduction and the expansion of nuclear power, contributing to SDG 7, 9, and 13. The IAEA Technical Cooperation Program is also facilitating an inter-regional project to build member states' capacities and safety review capacities in the area of small modular reactors, and to examine how SMR can be utilized to support climate change mitigation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 2015, the world made a crucial commitment to limit global climate change through signing the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement seeks to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not on track to meet these goals. The UN Environmental Programme Emission Gap Report of 2021 points out that global warming is likely to increase by almost 3 degrees Celsius. This is far beyond the limit set by the key international agreement. Cooperation between the countries and the relevant government agencies must be expanded to develop comprehensive and sustainable solutions for all. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the IAEA provides expert support and guidance to member states embarking on and/or expanding a nuclear power program. Assistance is delivered through tailored national technical cooperation projects that address all issues areas based on IAEA milestone approach. Today's workshop, as part of G20 Energy Transition Working Group series, is an important step in maintaining momentum and ensuring that the world is on track to meet these goals, both climate and development goals, in this pivotal decade of action. I sincerely thank our speakers, and especially the G20 Secretariat, the Energy Transition Working Group, my colleagues, and the entire team for making this workshop a success. We look forward to our future cooperation with you all. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hualiu, for the conclusion today. We're finally at the end of today's event. Let's listen to the closing remarks that will be delivered by Dr. Prahoro Nurcahyo as our co-chair of the Energy Transitions Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022.
All distinguished speakers and participants, greeting to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. As co-chair of ETWG, I am pleased to conclude this webinar. In today's webinar, we have been listening to the perspectives from all speakers on rethinking nuclear potentials as a pathway toward net zero future and Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Among others, these include nuclear roles in net zero emissions, technological innovations, sustainable infrastructure, low emission economy, quality jobs, and human resources development in the transitions. Going over the various sessions on nuclear energy, I have noted several important points to raise. First, indeed, nuclear has the potential to be a part of energy transitions toward a net zero future and to achieve Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Besides hydropowers, nuclear has the capacity to become the backbone of the power baseload in clean energy supply. I am certain that nuclear will be a significant technological solution for clean energy transitions. This will not only contribute to developed countries, but also for emerging economies and developing countries. Second, we need innovative technologies for the development of nuclear roles in energy transitions. This will not only overcome geographical challenges, but will also enhance flexibility, affordability, and supply stability in clean energy production. One implementation of this is the small modular reactor technology. Third, nuclear energy could potentially enhance a just, inclusive, and people-centered energy transitions. Due to the high level of skills required, nuclear energy will provide both technological and human resource development required for clean energy transitions, both in developed and developing economies. This includes the creation of multi-level clean energy jobs, provision of clean energy for broader economic sectors, and generating multiplier effects for the economy. Fourth, in order to promote the highest standards of nuclear safety, security, and non-proliferation, G20 and countries who opt with nuclear energy shall enhance international cooperations on the respective energy transitions. Moving forward, we are also planning to amplify the recommendations, practices, and experiences to include nuclear roles and potentials in the key deliverables of G20 ETWG. I sincerely hope that you will continue to follow the G20 ETWG virtual webinar series, as we have several webinars on new and renewable energy coming up. Looking forward to see you again in the next webinar. All distinguished.
Thank you, Dr. Prahoro Nurcahyo. The remarks is also officially end the G20 virtual side event with the main topic of nuclear potentials in energy transitions. We all hope that today's fruitful discussion and recommendations pave the way forward for the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group to together achieve a global deal to accelerate energy transitions. I would like to say thank you for your presence and participations today. We truly hope to see you again on the next G20 events. Recover together, recover stronger.